Hey everyone, welcome to part 2 of the build of this On30 layout that I'm calling Big Pine Mine. I've made a lot of progress since the first video where we built the structure base area, added on the track. Since then, I've built this mountain here that's foam covered in Sculptamold. I've built a base area here for part of the mine structure, a road around there, a loading area. I've installed some cribbing in the ravine in the front part of the layout. I've temporarily stuck on some of these Scenic Express ponderosa pine trees, but I just temporarily stuck these in place so you can kind of get an idea of the theme of the layout and what it's going to look like. So anyway, let's take a look at what I've done to get to this point. Okay, so to build up the base scenery on this layout, I used some of that green floral foam you can pick up from many craft stores. This is too expensive to use on a bigger layout, but for a small layout it's really nice because you can really easily shape this foam with your hand. It has an open cell structure, so it's very easy to kind of squish into shape with your fingers. You can kind of almost mold it with your hands, and so it is very easy to use for these kinds of projects. So I cut all the pieces that I had to size to fit the different areas where I needed to have that structure of the underlying foam. And once I had everything cut to size and shaped, I worked on gluing everything in place with hot glue. But because the underlying pink styrofoam is a pretty smooth surface, I went ahead and scored everything with a knife just to make sure there's a little bit more texture to that foam for the hot glue to kind of bite into and adhere when I was gluing the foam in place. So I got the initial layers of foam glued down. I made sure that I had clearance in the tunnel area for that trolley. This is an On30 trolley that's bigger than anything I plan to run on this layout in terms of rolling stock. And so if that trolley can make it, then anything else will as well. So I glued the initial layers of foam down in place. So once that was done, I masked off all the track and brought out the Sculptamold. I just used an extra paint tray that I had on hand and mixed up a batch of Sculptamold. One thing that is also nice about this open cell structure of this green floral foam is that any kind of plaster or Sculptamold, it's not going to come off very easily because it does have all those little holes to kind of bite into. So I just worked on spreading the Sculptamold around all the base layers of foam here, making sure I had good coverage and everything was adhered really well. And again, the main idea here was to get the interior of the tunnel done so I could get that finished and painted and everything, and then work on the surrounding part of the mountain. So once I had everything covered with Sculptamold, these lower layers of foam along with the interior of the tunnel, I set that aside to dry. Then I just took some brown paint, made a thin wash, and spread that around the interior of the tunnel wall area, as well as the surrounding areas around the tunnel entrances. I also painted the underside of the big foam block for the top part of the mountain, so if you did look into the tunnel and look up, you would see something that was brown and not just green foam or whatever other color that happened to be there. Next, I worked on the track on the inside of the tunnel. I took 2 colors of camo spray paint and sprayed the track with both of those to kind of give sort of a weathered brown look to the track. I immediately came back and cleaned off the rail heads of the track so the paint wouldn't dry on top of the rails and then make it a lot harder to get clean later. And then I brought out some of my ballast. For this layout here, I'm just taking some Woodland Scenics Talus. I have a little bit of leftover Earth Blend as well from Scenic Express and another random dirt mix that I had picked up from, I think, off Amazon. And I mixed all that together in a cup. I used that as my ballast blend, and that was also going to be the general color of all the rock on the layout. So after mixing up that ballast mix, I just took some regular strength white glue, painted that on the inside of the tunnel on each side of the track, so I would have something underneath the ballast to kind of initially grab it. And then I took my ballast and spread it all over on the tunnel area, getting a pretty good even coverage from one side of the tunnel wall to the other, and making sure I had the track itself more or less clean. Then I sprayed some rubbing alcohol as a wetting agent and took some diluted glue and spread that everywhere to help secure the ballast in place. And you can see here what that looked like. So when that was dry the next day, I came back and worked on gluing on the remainder of the foam mountain. Again, just using hot glue, which really bites into that open cell foam very nicely. So once that hot glue was put in place, I pressed down the upper part of the mountain. I then added more painter's tape on the track on the inside of the tunnel to protect that as I worked on the remaining scenery. I added a little bit more hot glue around the joints between the big foam block and the previous areas of foam, and then mixed up some more Sculptamold. I then spread that Sculptamold on all the remaining exposed areas of foam to get nice good coverage. I also mixed up some additional Sculptamold and covered the ravine area as well. Once that was dry a day or two later, I mixed up some more of that brown wash and coated the remainder of the layout. With that done and the painter's tape removed, it really started to look a lot more like a completed layout. I then sprayed the remaining track area again with those two colors of camo brown spray paint, cleaned off the rail heads, and tested everything out to make sure it was running well. Before I did any more work on the layout, I had to start building the mine structure for this layout, which again is a Bantam Models Works kit. I had to figure out where everything was going to fit because again, this is an O-scale structure and it was going to take up a lot of room. And so before I started working on anything else, I wanted to make sure I had everything placed well on the layout. I didn't have to build the whole kit, just get the sizes of the structures. And so I did do some preliminary assembly. So for the hoist house or lift house here, I did assemble the overall frame of that layout. I had the base area and I assembled the interior wall structures with some regular wood glue. And so I had the full size of what that structure was going to be. I just used painter's tape to help hold everything together while the glue dried. And then I worked on the actual tipple in terms of the bin because that would give me the rough size of what that part of the structure was going to be. So there, I didn't glue anything together. I just used tape to help make the structure. And then I took some chipboard to figure out what the overall size of the base was going to be. The tipple was framed on the exterior, so the frame of the structure was going to make the whole piece a little bit bigger than just the actual interior bin was. And also there was going to be the actual mine shaft and elevator lift on one side of the tipple. And so I had to make sure I had that area marked out as well. So I figured out the rough size of what that whole structure was going to be and cut that out. So I had the footprint for that part of the structure. And so with a combination of those two, I could figure out how everything was going to fit. And so once I was happy with how the placement was going to work out, I had to chop off a big part of that mountain. So I took a saw and cut out a big part of that mountain until I had a nice platform area for that structure. It's actually pretty hard to cut through the Sculptamold once it's dry. I ended up using a drywall saw, which worked really well. And obviously I could have planned this out in advance, but I really like actually starting out with a basic scenery shape and then trying to work in everything else afterwards, because then you have to make a lot of changes in terms of cuts and maybe add retaining walls, and you end up having to actually work the land like you would with a real structure. And that's not very efficient, certainly. And you do waste some materials doing that, but I just find it kind of fun to actually build things in that way. Anyway, I eventually got things cut out to where everything was going to work, but I needed to build some new bases. So I mixed up some Sculptamold, and I decided to first work on the area behind where that hoist house was going to be. And so I could have a loading platform there where you could have a flat car, box car, pull up and deliver, supplies or whatever. And so I added just some Sculptamold along the side of the track there and just squished on a piece of chipboard to serve as a flat base area. This would eventually get covered in gravel and dirt and stuff, but I wanted kind of a nice raised platform area right alongside the track. I filled in more Sculptamold along the edges of the new platform, made sure I had clearance with the boxcar, and then worked on adding Sculptamold underneath the main platform for the hoist house, again putting a piece of chipboard on there to have a nice flat even base. And then it was just a matter of filling in more Sculptamold around the base areas and then recoating the mountain where I had to cut it away for that structure area. I then put a piece of scrap foam in front of the structure platform area because I did want to have a road coming around to where that platform area was going to be. So obviously you could have a pickup truck or whatever get to that loading platform and then drive around towards the tipple and bring the supplies wherever they needed to go. So I took a piece of scrap foam to help build up that area and then just spread more Sculptamold around on top of that and around it to build a nice smooth road area going all the way around where that lift house structure was going to be. And because I did have a lot of thick Sculptamold in this area, what I actually ended up doing was sitting this outside in the sun for a while, and then I actually put it in front of a little space heater during the course of a day, and that really helped dry it out really fast. I didn't have to wait 3 or 4 days for all the Sculptamold to fully dry, since I did have some pretty thick layers there, and some areas that were underneath that chipboard, which would have taken a long time to fully dry. And once all that was dry, I took the same brown paint mix I had been using on all the other scenery so far and painted all this new scenery area with that as well, so it blended in with the existing scenery. And then took the same ballast mix I had and ballasted all the track outside the tunnel except for that area there where the ravine was. And now my original plan here was to build a trestle across this little ravine, but as I was sitting there looking at this, I decided that it just really didn't make a lot of sense to have a trestle, because that would be a lot harder to construct if you were building this. It would make more sense to just build some cribbing there and just fill the entire ravine area with a bunch of soil and dirt and rock and everything, and put the track across that, instead of actually trying to build a little bridge structure. So that's what I did. I actually took some of the wood from the mine kit, a few pieces of that strip wood. I'll have to go out and probably buy some more unless I modify the structure a little bit. And I basically just built some cribbing using that wood. So I just basically laid pieces down, glued cross pieces on, and basically built up that wood timber wall, as I went here, just using some tacky glue to help attach everything and hold it together. And so once everything was glued together, I just took some brown Hunterline stain and stained all of the wood before the glue dried. This way I could work that stain in and around all the glue joints, and I wouldn't have to worry about the glue drying into the wood before the stain was on it, which would then prevent the stain from getting absorbed into the wood. So this way all of the wood would get stained evenly with that brown stain. And it would have made more sense to stain the wood before I glued it together, but I didn't really think about that until I was already gluing everything together for this wall. I added more of the tacky glue to help glue everything in place, and then I just started filling in everything behind that wall. I used a couple pins and a couple weights to help hold that wall in place so it wouldn't move while I was doing this. And then I just added some glue, added some talus, and just kept building that up, pouring glue in place, adding more talus until I had this basically completely filled ravine area with all the rock and talus. Now, obviously, again, I could have just stuffed it with foam and filled it in with other things, but it was just kind of fun to actually fill everything in and kind of pretend I was building this for real. So everything is just literally filled in with talus and glue and dirt and everything else. And there's a lot of glue in there, so once it did dry, it was a very solid structure with all that dirt and rock and glue in there, and eventually just propped up the front of the layout on the block so the glue wouldn't all run out and stay pooled up back there behind that wall. So anyway, you can see here what that looked like when it was mostly dry. And I'll come back and still add more ground foam and textures and things to this area. There'll still be some more work done with that, but you can kind of see here how everything is generally going to look. I also picked up several of these Ponderosa pines from Scenic Express, and I kind of just placed these on here so you can get an idea of what those are going to look like. These are relatively inexpensive, between about $14 and $18 a tree, but these are all between 8 and 12 inches tall, so they're really big. And I am going to be scratch building a larger 2-foot tall pine tree in a later video, but you can kind of get an idea of what those trees look like with the structure here. One of the last steps here for this part of the construction was to paint the whole base area and the bottom edges of the scenery with a black paint. I used the same satin black paint that I've been using on my last couple of projects, and I basically painted all the base area as well as the surrounding sides with that black paint. I did put on 2 coats of this paint. The first coat is just going to kind of really act more like a sealer, so I wasn't trying to put on too heavy of a coat, just really get it worked into the wood good, make sure I didn't have any runs or drips or anything. And then I came back later on when that had dried and put on a second coat on the entire layout. So anyway, that's a look at where things are at with this On30 layout. In the next video in this series, I'll go through completing the mine structure, getting that installed, and getting most of the remainder of the scenery installed. I'm also going to have a separate video on building a really large pine tree, like 2 feet tall, because it is Big Pine Mine. And so I'm going to scratch build a big, roughly 2-foot tall pine tree. And so we'll see how that goes. And that'll be its own video, but it'll also be kind of dovetailed into this series as well. So anyway, yeah, a lot of fun progress on this layout, and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss the remainder of this layout series. And if you're looking for some additional content, I did start up channel memberships recently. I'm just posting random content there that isn't really a fully baked video. It's just clips of what I'm working on, that kind of thing. So if you want to see more updates in between the videos on these projects, you can consider becoming a member. You can also get early access to the videos that way. So usually I'm posting videos several days in advance of their Tuesday release, and I'm hopefully going to get back to having a 2 or 3 week cushion as I progress through the year. Usually I try to do that to where I have a library kind of already uploaded and scheduled out. So if I go on vacation or during the holidays, I can take a few weeks off and not have to worry about doing videos. But anyway, something to look at if you want even more content, or you want the content a little bit faster. But anyway, that's all for now, and thanks for watching. Bye.